The flashbulbs were blinding a galaxy of miniature suns erupting for every practiced smile and silk-draped shoulder that graced the crimson carpet. Tonight was the night Graham Pierce, the titan of tech, cemented his legacy. Inside the Grand Sovereign Hotel's opulent ballroom, champagne flowed like water and whispers of billion-dollar deals hung in the air like expensive perfume. But the real story wasn't the success of Pierce Innovations. It was the woman clinging to Graham's arm, Kinsley Ray, an influencer, half his age, dripping in diamonds that were meant for another woman. He paraded her like a trophy, a brazen statement to the world. But in a story of power, arrogance, and betrayal, the most dangerous person is the one you underestimate. And tonight, the woman they all thought was a forgotten victim was about to remind everyone that she didn't just attend the party. She owned the ballroom it was held in. The ballroom of the Grand Sovereign Hotel was not merely a room, it was a statement. A vast cavern of gilded ambition where Swarovski crystals dripped from the chandeliers like frozen tears, and the plush Aubusson carpet muffled the footsteps of the city's most powerful figures. Tonight it was Graham Pierce's kingdom, the Gala ostensibly celebrating a decade of dominance for his company. Pierce Innovations was, in reality, a coronation. His coronation. Graham stood at the epicenter of it all, a man forged in the crucible of hostile takeovers and ruthless market strategy. He was tall with a mane of silver-streaked dark hair, brushed back from a face that was more commanding than handsome. His tuxedo was a bespoke creation from Savile Row, tailored to perfection, a dark armor for a modern king. "Isn't it spectacular, darling?" he murmured, his voice, a low rumble of satisfaction. He wasn't speaking to the esteemed venture capitalist to his left, but down to the woman whose hand was possessively tucked into the crook of his arm. Kinsley Ray looked up at him, her eyes wide with a practiced awe that had served her well in her rapid ascent from Instagram model to CEO's arm candy. Her dress was a sliver of crimson silk that left little to the imagination, her blonde hair styled into a sleek, severe bob that framed a face of startling, almost artificial beauty. "It's everything, Giddy. You've really outdone yourself. This place is divine." He smirked, a slight predatory curl of the lips. The best for the best. He squeezed her hand, enjoying the frisson of power that came from displaying her so openly. It was a declaration. He was Graham Pierce, and he took what he wanted. Social conventions were for lesser men. For months, their affair had been the subject of hushed gossip in boardrooms and venomous whispers at charity luncheons. He had been careless brazen, even taking Kinsley to exclusive restaurants and on weekend trips to St. Bart's. It was a game to him testing the limits of his influence. Tonight was the final move, the checkmate. Bringing Kinsley to his company's flagship event was not just an indiscretion, it was a public execution of his marriage. Mr. Pierce, a photographer from a prominent business journal, pushed through the crowd. A photo with Ms. Ray. Of course, Graham boomed, turning Kinsley towards the light. The camera flashed, capturing the image he wanted the world to see: power and youth, success and beauty, the future. He felt Kinsley preen beside him, her entire being focused on finding the perfect angle. She was an accessory, the most beautiful and expensive one he had ever acquired, and she played her part flawlessly. As the photographer moved on, Graham's gaze swept the room. He saw his board members, their faces a mixture of forced smiles and nervous deference. He saw his competitors, their eyes glinting with a cocktail of envy and resentment. He saw the city's elite all paying homage to him in his cathedral of success. Everything was exactly as it should be. He took a flute of champagne from a passing waiter, handing it to Kinsley. "Drink up. This entire night is for us." To us, she chirped, clinking her glass against his. But as he drank a flicker of something, a shadow in the periphery caught his eye. It was Bernard, his chief financial officer, talking to his own wife, his expression strained. Bernard's wife pointedly refused to look in Graham's direction. Graham dismissed it with an internal scoff. They were dinosaurs clinging to outdated moralities. They didn't understand that for men like him, the rules were different. His wife, Annalise, certainly didn't understand. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 days, not since their last frigid conversation, where she had simply said, "Are you really going to do this?" Graham. There was no pleading, no tears, just a quiet, almost unnerving calm that he had mistaken for resignation. Defeat. He pictured her now probably at their cold, cavernous penthouse, surrounded by art she'd curated and books she'd read. Annalise Davenport Pierce. She was a Davenport, which meant old money and a pedigree that had been useful to him in his early days. Her quiet elegance and intelligence had been assets, then a perfect corporate wife who could charm investors and host flawless dinner parties. But she was subdued, lacking the fire, the public sparkle of someone like Kinsley. And in the past year, she had become even more withdrawn. He had grown bored. Boredom for Graham was a fatal disease in any relationship, business or personal. "Is everything okay?" Giddy Kinsley asked, her voice pulling him from his thoughts. Her perfectly manicured fingers traced a line on his lapel. "You look a million miles away." He refocused on her, the perfect, uncomplicated creature before him. "Just thinking about the past, my dear," he said smoothly, "and how much brighter the future looks." He leaned in and kissed her, a deliberate public display of ownership. The murmurs in the room rose a decibel, a wave of scandalized excitement. This was what he wanted. He wanted them to talk. He wanted them to know that he was utterly, unapologetically in control of his universe. He felt invincible, standing in the heart of the grand sovereign, a monument to wealth and power. It was the perfect venue for his triumph, a gilded stage for the first act of his new life. He had no idea how perfect a stage it would be, or that he was merely a bit player in a much grander play. The air in the grand sovereign ballroom was thick with more than just the scent of peonies and expensive perfume. It was charged with the electric current of scandal. Every corner held a knot of people, heads bowed together, champagne flutes held like conspiratorial props. The topic was singular, Graham Pierce, and his shockingly public declaration of infidelity. Tabitha Doyle, a society columnist whose pen was sharper than a surgeon's scalpel, moved through the crowd like a shark sensing blood. Her ears were her greatest asset, and tonight they were feasting. She sidled up to a group huddled near the raw bar, pretending to inspect an oyster while she listened. Utterly shameless, a woman in a Chanel tweed suit was saying, her voice a low hiss, "Annalise is at home pregnant, and he's here with that. The girl looks like she was assembled from a catalogue of current trends." Tabitha's fingers tightened on her clutch. Pregnant, that was new. A crucial, explosive detail. "I heard Annalise's family, the Davenports, gave him his seed money. A man with a florid face, added swirling a brandy snifter. This is how he repays them, by humiliating their daughter in the most public way. Imaginable power is the ultimate aphrodisiac," Robert Chanel Tweed countered dryly. "And Graham is drowning in it. He thinks he's untouchable." Tabitha had her angle. This wasn't just a tawdry affair. It was a story of hubris, of a man spitting in the face of the very people who had helped build his throne. She began mentally composing the opening lines of her column. Meanwhile, Graham continued his victory lap, Kinsley's high-pitched laughter echoing in his wake. He led her to the long mahogany bar that stretched across one wall of the ballroom. "2 more, Graham said to the bartender, not with a request, but a command. As the bartender poured, Graham's eyes landed on a figure standing alone near the end of the bar, watching him with an unnerving intensity. Dominic Valenti, CEO of Valenti Corp, Pierce Innovation's most ferocious rival. The two men shared a mutual loathing that was the stuff of industry legend. Valenti was everything. Graham wasn't sleek, subtle, with a quiet danger that lurked behind his dark, assessing eyes. Graham, feeling expansive and invincible, decided to needle him. He steered Kinsley in Valenti's direction. Dominic, Graham said, his voice oozing false bonhomie. "Surprised to see you here? I thought you'd be too busy trying to figure out why your Q3 profits looked so anemic." Valenti took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze flicking from Graham to Kinsley and back again. "I always make time to witness history, Graham. And a man self-immolating on this scale, it's a rare spectacle." Kinsley shifted uncomfortably, not quite understanding the venom beneath the polished words. Graham's smile tightened. "I call it shedding dead weight. You should try it sometime. Your company is bloated with it." He put a proprietary arm around Kinsley's bare waist. "This is Kinsley Ray." Valenti gave Kinsley a brief, dismissive nod, his attention remaining fixed on Graham. A bold choice. "The venue, I mean," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "The Grand Sovereign. Did you choose it yourself?" The question seemed odd, but Graham took the bait, puffing up his chest. "Of course. Only the best. The pinnacle of luxury. I wanted a space that reflected the status of my company." He gestured expansively at the room. Every detail, from the neoclassical architecture to the thread count in the linens upstairs, screams power. It costs a fortune, but you get what you pay for. "You certainly do," Valenti said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes you pay a price. You aren't even aware you're being charged. Enjoy your evening, Graham. I have a feeling it's going to be unforgettable." Valenti turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving Graham with a faint, unsettling feeling, like a cold draft in a warm room. He shook it off. It was just envy. Dominic was a snake always looking for a weakness. But tonight, Graham had none. "What a creep," Kinsley whispered, wrinkling her nose. "Let's go dance, Giddy. I want everyone to see my dress sparkle under the big chandeliers." "Anything you want," he murmured, his arrogance surging back. He led her onto the dance floor, just as the band began a slow, languid song. He pulled her close, his hand splayed on the small of her back, the scent of her perfume filling his senses. They were the center of attention, a vortex of glamour and scandal that drew every eye in the room. He felt the stares, the whispers, and he savored them. They weren't judging him. They were envying him. They were trapped in their stale, passionless marriages while he was here with this vibrant, beautiful young woman in his arms. He dipped Kinsley low, her blonde hair brushing the floor, eliciting a smattering of applause from those watching. As he brought her back up, his gaze drifted towards the grand arched entrance of the ballroom. For a moment, he thought he saw a familiar figure standing in the shadows of the marble entryway, but he blinked and it was gone. Just a trick of the light. Nothing could touch him tonight. He was the king in his castle, the master of his universe. The song ended. The applause grew, and Graham Pierce, drunk on power and champagne, stood in the center of the floor, completely blissfully unaware that he wasn't in his castle at all. He was in a cage, and the owner was about to come home. While Graham basked in the manufactured glow of his gala, Annalise Davenport, Pierce was preparing for war. Her battlefield was not a ballroom, but the quiet, steel and glass severity of her private study, 20 floors above the city, with a panoramic view of the skyline. The Grand Sovereign Hotel was a glittering jewel in the tapestry of lights below. Her jewel, She was not the wilting, heartbroken wife Graham imagined. The past year of his escalating carelessness had not broken her. It had forged her. Her quiet nature, which he'd mistaken for passivity, was in fact a reservoir of patience and meticulous observation. She had watched him, studied him, and planned. Annalise stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror, not to admire her reflection, but to assess her armor. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored sheath dress in a deep shade of sapphire blue. It was modest, elegant, and bespoke. Unlike Kinsley's revealing crimson number, Annalise's dress didn't scream for attention. It commanded it through sheer class. The fabric skimmed over her body, the expert tailoring artfully concealing the gentle swell of her belly. She was 4 months pregnant, a fact she had kept to herself. It was not a vulnerability to be exploited by Graham, but a secret strength, a future he would have no part in. Her long chestnut hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon at the nape of her neck. Her only jewelry was a pair of diamond stud earrings, a gift from her father and her wedding ring, a heavy band of platinum that suddenly felt like a foreign object. Soon she thought that too would be gone. Her phone buzzed on the polished mahogany desk. The caller ID read, "Brendan Shaw." She answered her voice, calm and even. "Brendan. Is everything in place?" Brendan Shaw was the general manager of the Grand Sovereign Hotel, but more importantly, he was a long-time employee of the Davenport Hospitality Group and fiercely loyal to Annalise and her family. He was her man on the inside. "He's here." Ms. Davenport, Brendan's voice, was crisp and professional, but she could detect the underlying note of disgust. "He's with the girl. They're making quite the spectacle on the dance floor. Let him, Annalise," said her eyes on the distant hotel. "Let him have his moment. The higher he climbs, the harder he will fall. Is the security team briefed? Team Bravo is in position in the service corridors. Team Alpha is on the floor in formal wear. They look just like guests. They will not move without your direct command. And the lobby feeds the elevators. I am personally monitoring all of them from the security hub. The moment you enter the building, I will lock down all elevator access, except for the service car to your private suite. No one goes up or down without my say-so. Excellent, Brendan. The board of Pierce Innovations, seated at tables 1 through 3, just as you requested. Direct line of sight to the entrance." Annalise took a deep breath, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. This wasn't just about revenge for a broken heart. Graham's arrogance had become a liability. He had leveraged his connection to the Davenport name to build his empire, and now he was actively tarnishing it. He had taken loans against Pierce Innovations' stock that was propped up by initial investments from her father's fund. His recklessness was a threat not just to her dignity, but to her family's legacy, and that Annalise would not tolerate. Her father, William Davenport, had taught her a cardinal rule of business: never let emotion cloud your strategy, but don't be afraid to use it as a weapon. For months she had allowed Graham to believe she was weak, defeated. She let him see tears, once a calculated display of vulnerability that had inflated his ego and made him even more careless. He had no idea that her withdrawn state was actually a period of intense activity. She had been in meetings with lawyers, forensic accountants, and her own executive board at Davenport Hospitality, the true source of her family's immense wealth. Graham knew she was a Davenport. He knew they were wealthy. What he had never bothered to understand was the scale of it. He thought her father was in real estate. A quaint oversimplification. Davenport Hospitality Group was a global behemoth owning a portfolio of the world's most exclusive luxury hotels, resorts, and commercial properties. The Grand Sovereign wasn't just a place he had rented for the night. It was a property Annalise had personally overseen the acquisition of 2 years prior. She knew every secret passage, every security protocol, every employee's name. "I'm on my way, Brendan," she said, her voice dropping to a steely resolve. "Initiate the protocol in 15 minutes. Understood, Miss Davenport. We're ready for you." She hung up and walked to her desk, picking up a slim, leather-bound folder. Inside were the preliminary findings from the forensic accountants. A roadmap of Graham's financial shell games and leveraged gambles. It was the ammunition she needed for the next phase of her war. She slipped the folder into her clutch, took one last look in the mirror, and saw not a jilted wife, but a CEO. A protector of a legacy. A mother-to-be. She was Annalise Davenport, and she was on her way to reclaim her house. The band finished its set with a flourish, and a wave of polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Graham, still radiating smug satisfaction from his dance with Kinsley, led her back towards the bar. He felt like a Roman emperor in his Colosseum, the roars of the crowd, or in this case the appreciative murmurs of the city's elite affirming his absolute power. "I need a drink," Kinsley said, fanning herself with her hand. "And then someone has to get a picture of me by that incredible ice sculpture." "Whatever you desire," Graham said magnanimously. It was in that moment, as the crowd shifted and parted, that the atmosphere in the room changed. It wasn't a sudden noise, but rather the opposite, a sudden spreading silence. The lively chatter near the entrance died first, creating a vacuum of sound that moved like a wave towards the center of the room. Heads turned. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. The clinking of glasses ceased. Graham, annoyed by the interruption, turned to see what had caused the commotion. And then he saw her. Annalise was standing in the grand arched entryway. She wasn't flanked by security or making a scene. She was simply there. A solitary figure of impossible calm in a sea of stunned faces. The sapphire of her dress seemed to absorb the light of the room, a stark, elegant contrast to the garish, crimson Kinsley wore. She held a small clutch in one hand, and her posture was ramrod straight, radiating an authority that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with presence. For a split second, Graham's brain failed to process the image. It was so incongruous, so utterly outside the realm of what he had anticipated, that he could only stare. This was not the withdrawn, defeated woman he had left in their penthouse. This was someone else. Then the shock curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. How dare she? How dare she come here and attempt to ruin his night? Kinsley saw her a moment later. Her vapid smile froze on her face, the color draining from her cheeks. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is she doing here?" Annalise's eyes, cool and dispassionate, scanned the room. They passed over the shocked faces of the board members, the intrigued smirk of Dominic Valenti, and the frantic, wide-eyed stare of Tabitha Doyle, who was already discreetly typing into her phone. Finally, her gaze landed on Graham. She held it, her expression unreadable, and then began to walk forward. She didn't storm in. She glided. Her pace was deliberate, unhurried, as she moved through the parted sea of guests. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the soft click of her heels on the marble floor. It was a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel in the cavernous room. Graham's paralysis broke, replaced by a surge of arrogant rage. He would not let her do this. He would have her thrown out. He took a step forward, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Annalise, what the hell do you think you're doing?" She stopped a few feet from him, creating a tense triangle between herself, her husband, and his mistress. She didn't even glance at Kinsley, an act of dismissal, so profound it was more insulting than any tirade. "I could ask you the same thing. Graham," she said, her voice perfectly level, yet it carried across the silent room with chilling clarity. "This is a private event." He spat his face, flushing with anger. "You are not welcome here." Security. He looked around wildly, expecting guards to materialize and drag his errant wife away. A few of the event staff looked nervously at each other, but no one moved. "Security," Annalise repeated, a flicker of something was it amusement in her eyes. "You seem to be under a misapprehension." Kinsley, recovering some of her nerve, stepped forward slightly. "You should leave," she said, trying to sound firm but coming across as shrill. "You're embarrassing yourself." For the first time, Annalise's gaze shifted to the younger woman. She looked her up and down, a slow, clinical assessment that stripped Kinsley of every ounce of her perceived glamour, leaving her feeling cheap and exposed. "Little girl," Annalise said, her voice soft, but laced with steel when the adults are speaking, "you will be silent." Kinsley recoiled, as if struck, her face turning a blotchy red. Graham's rage boiled over. He grabbed Annalise's arm. "That's it. You're leaving. Now." Annalise didn't flinch. She didn't struggle. She simply looked down at his hand on her arm, and then back up to his face. "Take your hand off me, Graham," she said. Not as a request, but as a final warning. The tension in the room was so thick it was suffocating. Everyone was watching, holding their breath. This was no longer just a scandal. It was a public execution, but it was becoming terrifyingly unclear who was the executioner and who was the condemned. Graham, blinded by his own hubris, was about to find out. Graham tightened his grip on Annalise's arm, fueled by a potent cocktail of rage and public humiliation. The king was being challenged in his own court, and his response was brutish and absolute. "I said you're leaving," he repeated through clenched teeth, starting to pull her towards the exit. "Security. Get over here and remove this woman." He looked towards the entrance, expecting to see the hotel's uniformed guards rushing to his aid. Instead, he saw Brendan Shaw, the general manager, walking towards them at a brisk, determined pace. Relief washed over Graham. Finally someone in charge. "Brendan." "Thank God," Graham barked, not releasing his grip on Annalise. "Your staff seems to be deaf." "I want my wife. I want this woman escorted from the premises immediately." Brendan stopped directly in front of them. He was a man in his late 50s, with a calm demeanor that had soothed countless difficult high-profile guests. But the look he gave Graham was not one of deference. It was one of profound disappointment. He completely ignored Graham's command and addressed Annalise directly, his voice ringing with formal respect. "Miss Davenport." "My apologies for the disturbance. Is there a problem?" Graham stared, bewildered. "Miss Davenport, not Mrs. Pierce." Why was the manager speaking to her as if she were the one in charge? Annalise finally looked at Brendan, her composure unwavering. "There is Brendan. This man has put his hands on me, and he is trespassing." Graham laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Trespassing? I've paid over $200,000 to rent this ballroom for the night. This is my event." Brendan's gaze shifted to Graham, and, for the first time, the calm mask slipped, revealing a layer of cold, hard authority. "Mr. Pierce, you rented the ballroom. You do not, however, own it." He then looked pointedly at Graham's hand, still clamped around Annalise's arm. "I would advise you to release the owner of this hotel, immediately." The words hung in the dead, silent air. The owner of this hotel. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Jaws literally dropped. Tabitha Doyle nearly dropped her phone. Dominic Valenti's lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. Graham's mind short-circuited. He stared from Brendan to Annalise, his brain refusing to connect the dots. What did you say?" "You heard him," Graham. Annalise said, her voice cutting through his confusion. She effortlessly pulled her arm from his now limp grasp. "You are a guest in my establishment, and your invitation has just been revoked." She turned slightly, her voice rising in pitch and authority, carrying to every corner of the room. "Brendan, please activate Protocol 77. Brendan nodded crisply. "At once, Miss Davenport." He spoke into a discreet radio on his lapel. "Initiate 77. All stations." Suddenly the room was in motion. From the shadows and the edges of the crowd, 6 large men in dark suits, Team Alpha, materialized. They moved with the quiet efficiency of seasoned professionals. 2 of them created a respectful perimeter around Annalise. The other 4 began to walk towards Graham. Simultaneously, the large screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the Pierce Innovations logo, flickered and changed. Now they showed the elegant, formidable crest of the Davenport Hospitality Group. Graham stumbled back, his face a mask of disbelief. "Davenport, Hospitality. That's your father's. He's in real estate. My father owns a global portfolio of luxury assets," Graham Annalise stated, her voice like ice. "A fact you might have learned if you'd ever shown the slightest interest in my life beyond my trust fund. The Grand Sovereign is one of our flagship properties. I personally managed its acquisition and rebranding." The 4 security men had reached Graham. They didn't touch him, but they stood in a silent, intimidating formation that left him no room to maneuver. Kinsley, who had been frozen in horror, finally understood the cataclysmic shift in power. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between the menacing security detail and the transformed Annalise. This wasn't a wronged wife. This was a titan. "Graham," Kinsley whispered, tugging on his sleeve, her voice trembling. "Giddy, what's happening?" Graham shook his head, trying to clear it. He was hemorrhaging power with every passing second, and he could feel the hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, their earlier whispers of scandal now replaced with the silence of utter shock and awe. "This is insane," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Annalise. "You can't do this. This is my gala. My celebration." Annalise took a step forward, her eyes blazing with a cold fire he had never seen before. "This was never your celebration, Graham. It was your final test, a test you have failed in the most spectacularly public fashion imaginable," she declared. "You have spent the last year humiliating me, disrespecting our marriage, and most unforgivably, leveraging my family's name and resources to fuel your own ego while tarnishing our reputation." She gestured to the stunned board members of Pierce Innovations. "Gentlemen, I do hope you're paying attention. Because as of this moment, the Davenport Fund is pulling all of its capital from Pierce Innovations. I believe our shares constitute a 34% stake. I imagine there will be an emergency board meeting in the morning." Panic erupted on the faces of the board members. 34%. It was a death blow. Annalise's gaze returned to her husband. "My party is over," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "Now get out of my building." The head of the security detail, a man with a jawline of granite, finally spoke. "Mr. Pierce, this way, please." It was no longer a request. Graham looked around his empire crumbling around him in a ballroom of his own choosing. He was trapped, exposed, and utterly defeated. The king had been dethroned not by a rival, but by the quiet, unassuming queen he had cast aside. The expulsion of Graham Pierce was executed with brutal, silent efficiency. As the security detail formed a human corridor, he had no choice but to walk. His face, once flushed with arrogant rage, was now a ghastly, ashen grey. He was a man hollowed out the architecture of his pride, demolished in a matter of minutes. Every step he took towards the exit was a walk of shame, performed for an audience of his peers, his board and his rivals. Kinsley Ray, abandoned in the center of the floor, became the secondary focal point of the disaster. Her crimson dress, once a symbol of audacious glamour, now looked like a gaudy costume. The diamonds around her neck seemed to cheapen under the weight of 1,000 judgmental stares. She looked from Graham's retreating back to Annalise's triumphant, formidable figure. Her gamble had failed. She had bet on the wrong monarch. Without a word, she turned and practically fled, scurrying through the crowd like a frightened mouse, her dreams of becoming the next Mrs. Pierce dissolving into a nightmare of public humiliation. The moment Graham was through the doors, a palpable shift occurred in the ballroom. The stunned silence broke not into the previous chatter, but into a low, buzzing hum of raw astonishment and newfound respect. The power in the room had not just shifted, it had been entirely redefined. Annalise Davenport was no longer the tragic background wife. She was the epicenter. As if on cue, the bar staff, under Brendan's direction, began circulating with fresh trays of champagne. The band, after a nod from the manager, began to play again, a soft, sophisticated jazz number. The message was clear, the unpleasantness was over. The real event could now begin. Annalise stood for a moment, letting the reality of what she had done settle over the crowd. She had not raised her voice, she had not cried, she had not lost her composure. She had simply corrected a mistake, her husband, with the chilling precision of a corporate takeover. Then a figure detached himself from the crowd and approached her. It was Dominic Valenti. He wasn't smirking anymore. His expression was one of genuine, unadulterated admiration. "Miss Davenport," he said, his voice low and respectful. "I must confess I have never witnessed a more elegant or effective decapitation in my entire career." Annalise offered him a small, wry smile. "I was merely tidying up, Mr. Valenti." "Please," he said, "call me Dominic. I believe our interests may suddenly be very much aligned." He glanced towards the tables where the shell-shocked Pierce Innovations board members were huddled in panicked conversation. "Graham's company is about to be in freefall. When your 34% stake hits the market or is recalled, the ensuing chaos will create opportunities for a competitor to absorb what's left at a very favorable price." Annalise's eyes met his. She understood immediately. He wasn't just offering condolences, he was proposing an alliance. He recognized her not as Graham's wife, but as a shark of his own caliber. "I'm always open to discussing opportunities, Dominic," she replied smoothly. "Though I might be interested in dismantling Pierce Innovations myself. Some assets may be worth salvaging for the Davenport portfolio." Dominic's eyebrows rose in appreciation. "A worthy goal. Perhaps we can find a way to assist each other. My card." He produced a sleek black business card and offered it to her. "My private cell. Call me when the dust settles." She took the card and nodded. "I will." As Dominic retreated, Brendan approached her. "Ms. Davenport, the press is going to have a field day with this. Tabitha Doyle has already posted a live blog. What are your instructions?" Annalise surveyed the room. The initial shock was wearing off, being replaced by a frantic energy. People were on their phones, spreading the story. This wasn't something she could contain, nor did she want to. She wanted Graham's humiliation to be total. She walked towards the small stage where the band was playing. As she approached, the musicians quieted. Brendan handed her a microphone. A hush fell over the room once more, as every guest turned to face her. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the grand hall. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for that unfortunate interruption." A few nervous laughs rippled through the audience. "Many of you came here tonight to celebrate the success of a company. As of tonight, the leadership of that company is under review." However, she continued, a note of warmth entering her tone that is no reason to let this magnificent food and this wonderful champagne go to waste. This evening is no longer a corporate gala. She paused, letting her next words land with maximum impact. Tonight this is a party, a celebration of new beginnings. Everything is on the house. Please enjoy the hospitality of the Grand Sovereign Hotel, my hotel. Thank you. She handed the microphone back to a beaming Brendan and was met with a thunderous, spontaneous round of applause. It was a masterful move, transforming a scene of personal revenge into an act of magnanimous generosity. She had not only vanquished her husband, but she had also won the unwavering loyalty and admiration of every powerful person in the room. They weren't just clapping for her, they were clambering to be on her side. The reign of Graham Pierce was over. The reign of Annalise Davenport had just begun. Dawn broke over the city, not with a gentle glow, but with the harsh digital glare of 1,000 screens telling one single cataclysmic story. The tale of Graham Pierce's downfall was not just news. It was a cultural event, a modern-day morality play consumed with voracious glee by millions before their first coffee. Tabitha Doyle's column had been the spark, but the internet was the wildfire. Financial news networks ran tickers that bled red with Pierce Inov PI, leading the carnage a downward-facing arrow beside its name, a stark, brutal epitaph. Business journals that had once lauded Graham as a visionary now ran speculative post-mortems under scathing headlines. The Sovereign Coup, how a CEO lost his empire in one night, and Pierce arrowed inside the fall of a tech titan. Social media was a torrent of memes and hot takes. Kinsley Ray's influencer accounts were being digitally immolated. But the true focus of the world's fascination was Annalise. Grainy photos and short, shaky videos from the gala had surfaced, capturing her regal calm amidst the chaos. She was an enigma of power, the quiet wife who had revealed herself to be a queen. While the world dissected her story, Annalise herself was insulated from the noise. She sat in the serene, minimalist expanse of her true office on the 50th floor of the Davenport Tower. The space was a cathedral of quiet confidence, all polished concrete, warm wood, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a god's-eye view of the city. She wasn't watching the news. Her focus was not on the past, but on methodically architecting the future. On the large oak conference table before her lay the architecture of Graham's ruin and her own ascendance. At her right was the thick damning file from the forensic accountants. At her left was the elegant, deceptively simple divorce petition. Across from her sat her lead counsel, Lauren Hayes, a woman whose calm demeanor masked a mind like a steel trap. "The petition is ready to be filed," Annalise Lauren said, her voice a model of professional composure. "Given the circumstances and the airtight prenuptial agreement, this will be swift. He gets his personal effects, and the severance clause stipulated in the prenup, which, considering the current value of his stock, is now negligible." A ghost of a smile touched Lauren's lips. Annalise nodded slowly, her gaze distant, focused on something far beyond the documents. "There is one more thing. I want the penthouse. It's technically in his name, but it was purchased with a loan guaranteed by my father's trust. I want it." Her voice was soft, but the command was absolute. Already in motion, Lauren confirmed. "We'll use the leverage from the misappropriation of funds. He won't have the capital or the will to fight it. Consider it done." Just then, Annalise felt a faint, delicate flutter deep within her. It was a sensation she was just beginning to recognize, a secret conversation between her and the life she carried. She unconsciously placed a hand on her abdomen. The cool, rational CEO momentarily replaced by the fiercely protective mother. All of this was for her child, to provide a world free of the taint of Graham's lies, to secure a legacy of strength and integrity. Her assistant's voice, soft and discreet, came through the intercom. "Ms. Davenport, my apologies for the interruption. But Graham Pierce is in the lobby. He's insistent on seeing you." Annalise exchanged a long, unreadable look with her lawyer. The final piece of the past had arrived, demanding an audience. She would not deny it. "Let him come up, Sarah," she said, her voice betraying nothing. "Lauren, I'd like you to stay. Please wait in the adjoining suite. I will call you if I need you." Lauren nodded, gathered her papers and exited through a private side door, leaving Annalise alone in the vast office. She stood and walked to the window, watching the distant, frantic energy of the city below. She was the calm at the center of the hurricane she had created. A few minutes later, the main office doors opened. Graham stood there, a man utterly undone. He wore the same bespoke tuxedo from the night before, now a rumpled shroud of his former self. His tie was gone, his collar unbuttoned. A dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, those once commanding, predatory eyes, were bloodshot and hollowed out with a desperate panic. He looked from the opulent, powerful space to the woman standing so calmly before it, and a flicker of his old rage surfaced. "Annalise," he began, his voice a ragged rasp. He strode into the room, a caged animal looking for someone to blame. "You can't do this. You can't just burn it all to the ground. All of it. The stock, the board. Years of my life, our life. You're destroying everything." Annalise remained by the window, turning to face him. Her expression was not one of anger or triumph, but of a profound, almost weary disappointment. "I destroyed nothing." "Graham," she replied, her voice perfectly even. "I simply turned on the lights. You are the one who built a house of cards in the dark, and you were too arrogant to think the sun would ever rise." She walked back to her desk and gestured to the plush leather chair opposite her. He ignored it, pacing back and forth like he was still on a trading floor trying to salvage a losing deal. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice," she continued, her voice cutting through his agitated energy, "that I wouldn't see the millions you were siphoning from corporate accounts for your extracurricular activities?" She tapped the thick accounting file on her desk. "It's all in there, Graham. Every hotel bill, every jewelry receipt, every chartered jet to a private island. Documented." He stopped, pacing, his gaze fixed on the file as if it were a venomous snake. "This is an invasion of privacy. A betrayal." He finally spat the accusation, reflexive and utterly devoid of self-awareness. Annalise's expression hardened. "Betrayal," she repeated, savoring the word's irony. "That is an interesting choice of words." She leaned forward, her hands flat on the polished desk. "Tell me, Graham, was it a betrayal when you paraded your mistress wearing diamonds you bought with company funds at an event celebrating our shared success? Was it a betrayal when you used my family's name and money to build an empire, only to use that empire to publicly humiliate me? Was it a betrayal," her voice dropped, laced with ice, "when you put your hands on me, in my own hotel, in front of everyone I know?" Each question was a precise surgical strike, dismantling his righteous anger and leaving only the raw, pathetic truth of his actions. He flinched, his bravado crumbling. I didn't—" He stammered, his desperation shifting into a plea. "Annalise, I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm sorry. We can fix this. I'll end it with Kinsley. It meant nothing. We can go to counseling. Think of our history. Everything we built. This was the moment. The pathetic last-ditch appeal to a past he had already incinerated." Annalise stood up, the movement fluid and final. She walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from him. The full devastating power of her position, financial, legal, and moral, was a palpable force in the room. "There is no we anymore, Graham," she said softly, "and you have no place in my future." She let the finality of those words settle before she delivered the coup de grace. She placed her hand back on her stomach, the gesture now deliberate a declaration. "I am pregnant." For a fleeting second, a wild, insane hope flashed in Graham's eyes. A child, a lifeline, a way to fix this, to claw his way back. He took a half-step toward her. "Pregnant Annalise, a baby. That changes everything." "No," she said, her voice like a closing vault door, extinguishing that flicker of hope instantly. "It changes nothing for you. I will not raise my child in a house built on lies and disrespect. This baby is a Davenport, my heir, and you will have no part in its life. You will have no claim. The divorce papers will cite our date of separation as 6 months ago when your affair began. It was the final devastating blow. The news of a child, a legacy, a future he was now irrevocably severed from, seemed to suck the very marrow from his bones. He physically staggered back and collapsed into the chair he had previously refused, his head falling into his hands, a choked, broken sound escaping his throat. Annalise watched him for a moment longer, her expression clear of pity. He was a problem that had been solved. She pressed a button on her desk phone. "Sarah, could you ask Ms. Hayes to join us and bring the package we prepared?" A moment later, Lauren entered her face, impassive. Following her was the assistant who placed a small, simple cardboard box on the corner of the desk. Annalise's voice was once again cool and professional. "Lauren will have her associate serve you with the divorce petition on your way out. This box contains your watch from the penthouse nightstand, your office keys, and a few other personal effects. The locks on the penthouse were changed this morning. Your remaining belongings will be delivered to a storage unit. You have 24 hours to provide an address for the key." She had taken everything. His company, his reputation, his home, and a future with a child he never even knew he wanted until the moment it was denied to him. She hadn't just defeated him. She had systematically and completely erased him from her life. He didn't look up. He couldn't. "Goodbye, Graham," she said, turning her back on the wreckage of her husband to face the window once more. The city sprawled before her, a kingdom of glass and steel. It was no longer just a view. It was a promise. The reign of Graham Pierce was a footnote in a history book she was now writing herself. And this was only chapter 1. And so the story of Graham Pierce serves as a chilling reminder that the brightest crowns are often the heaviest, and the quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. He built an empire on arrogance, believing he was untouchable, only to discover he was merely a tenant in a palace owned by the queen he had tried to discard. Annalise Davenport didn't just reclaim her life. She revealed the powerhouse she had been all along, proving that true strength isn't about the noise you make, but the foundations you build in silence. It's a story of karma strategy, and the epic downfall of a man who forgot the golden rule: never underestimate the person who helped you build your throne. What did you think of Annalise's ultimate move? Was it pure revenge or a masterclass in business? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy stories of epic takedowns and justice served cold, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good drama, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We have so many more stories like this one coming, and you won't want to miss a single shocking twist. Hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when our next story drops. Thanks for listening.